Now, one of the most fantasized about lifestyles in all of popular media for as long as I can remember has been that of the pirate. The free-living, swashbuckling men and women that roam the high seas in search of fame and treasure. Now, from Pirates of the Caribbean to video games to books, many stories have been told about the pirates. However, how much of this is actually factual? What were pirates really like? Well, today I hope to answer all that for all of you. Today I hope to answer some of those questions for all of you as we take a look at the life of one of the most famous pirates of all time, that being Blackbeard himself. Now we will take a look at depictions of him in popular culture, what the true story is, and how his life actually came to an end, all in an effort to shed some light on what the pirates were truly like and how they lived. So as usual, I'm Cameron, let's get into it. So who was Blackbeard, and what do you think of when you hear that name? Most have probably seen pictures of the supposed Blackbeard, a massive and intimidating man with, obviously, a massive black beard. Such a man strikes awe in the hearts of those who would see him. Perhaps as well of you have heard of the supposed treasure that Blackbeard hid away or buried, a treasure that was never found and could possibly still exist off in some remote place. What if this is true, and what if this is false? Now the thing about Blackbeard is a lot of his life and deeds have been completely blown out of proportion and mythicized, so it's really hard to find the truth in the myth. Now, the first thing to know about Blackbeard is that not a lot is actually known about the life of Blackbeard. Hence, this is part of the reason why he's so mythicized. So let's start with what we do know before delving into some speculation. Now, the origins of Blackbeard are not really known for certain. His actual name is thought to have been Edward Teach, and he is thought to have been born in England around 1680. Keep in mind that this was far before the internet, far before we could learn the names of anyone by a simple button press. Information on every person born was not always kept track of, let alone those not in the upper classes. So we knew where he probably came from, so what next? That's a good question, as we aren't even certain of his name and origin, the first thing that was known. So we know where he probably came from, so what next? See, that's a good question, as we aren't even sure of his name and origin, and the first thing that is known of Blackbeard is that he appeared in 1716, after the wrecks of Spanish ships carrying treasure occurred on Florida's Atlantic coast. These wrecks drew pirates from all around in search of wealth, including Blackbeard himself. Later the next year, he captured a French merchant ship known as the Queen Anne's Revenge, a famous ship you may have heard of if you are familiar with his story. He converted this merchant ship into a warship armed with 40 cannons. With this ship, Blackbeard would become famous. With this ship, Blackbeard would also begin his life as a pirate, raiding along the coasts of the Carolinas, Virginia, and the Caribbean Sea. In 1718, Blackbeard would establish a base at an inlet in North Carolina and would then proceed to forcibly collect tolls for passage in Pamlico Sound. All of these things would paint a picture of a savage pirate. However, interestingly, at this time as well, Blackbeard struck up an agreement with Charles Eden, the governor at that time of North Carolina. This agreement was one for sharing of loot and suggests that Blackbeard must have had some sophisticated mannerisms that would allow him to communicate effectively with the upper echelons of society at that time. Now, on that note, I want to go back and delve once more into the origins and life of Blackbeard. Why, you ask? Well, recently an article was published in the Smithsonian Magazine that delves into the research done by a Bayless Brooks, a historian and genealogist from Florida. Brooks decided to look into the origins of Blackbeard by looking to see if there were any records of teaches or thatches in Jamaica, a place that Blackbeard supposedly called home. And by the way, thatches, if I'm pronouncing it right, is another common variant of teach. His research based on records he found on Edward and his family proposed that Edward Teach grew up in Jamaica after their family came from Bristol, England to seek better fortune there. The document lists that Edward Teach joined up with a merchant ship and then later the Royal Navy. This would have been in 1706, around 10 years before he became a pirate, and he would have been around 20 at that time. Now, this is most of the information the article presents, and it paints a very different picture of Blackbeard from what most are probably used to. See, he most probably grew up well off and joined the British Navy at a young age. Most would probably assume, as I always have, that he grew up poor and fought his way to the top through intimidation and other nefarious means. Part of the reason that we believe these things is because for so long, nothing was known about the man, so all we have, whenever we look at history, was our imaginations, and the imagination can be wild. Alright, so how did the pirating days of Blackbeard come to an end? Well, you see, it's really simple. After terrorizing the coastlines of the British colonies for around 2 years, the governor of Carolina would not do anything, so the lieutenant governor of neighboring Virginia, Alex Spotswood, took action. He dispatched a British naval force under Lieutenant Robert Maynard to hunt down Blackbeard. Maynard took 2 ships to Ocracoke Island, where Blackbeard was sheltering, to bring him down. On engagement, Blackbeard pommeled one of the ships with a cannon, before pulling up to the other, where hand-to-hand combat ensued. It was in this fighting that he fell, and according to Maynard, it took 5 bullets and many sword cuts to bring him down. And so Blackbeard was defeated, and Maynard severed his head and attached it to the bow of his ship as a trophy. And that is how Blackbeard's story ends. See, this was a man that was really not in a bad position in society, and he initially took a good path in life, joining the merchant vessel and later the British Navy, before turning to piracy. However, the stories made him out to be exceptionally violent. However, during the 2 years that he was a pirate, he actually very, very rarely used violence. Now, a lot of the infamy that he gained was after his death, and after the publication of a book by Captain Charles Johnson in 1724 called A General History of the Robberies and Murders of the Notorious Pirates. And it describes Blackbeard as being a bloodthirsty pirate who loved battle. It created the story of Blackbeard lighting matches under his hat and his black beard that has for so long been commonly associated with it. Now, of course, as time goes on, stories become more and more distorted. Stories of Blackbeard's hidden treasure appeared, which are most certainly false. If there's anything we can learn from all of this, it's that history is never just what's put in the history books. It's always way more complex with so many moving pieces, and most of it is always based on oral telling through memory, and memory is always a fickle thing. And also we can learn that you don't want to be a pirate because people are going to try and kill you, so don't do that. Alright, so what do you think about the life of Blackbeard? Now, I know it's not quite as fantastical or anything as you might have imagined. I know I've always kind of just thought he was like Davy Jones from Pirates of the Caribbean or something, but sadly that's not the case. And like I mentioned earlier, this just happens a lot of times with history. Things get distorted through time when there's not a lot of historical records and stuff, and things just get blown out of proportion, as in this case. But either way, I hope you learned something, maybe cleared some things up. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe, leave a comment, something like that. Say hello in the comments, I guess. I don't know. And as usual, I've been Cameron, and I will see you on the flip side.